The kingdom of Eldoria stood as a beacon of prosperity, its golden towers glistening under the morning sun. Lush green fields stretched across the land, and the people thrived under the rule of King Reginald. His reign was marked by wisdom and justice, ensuring that Eldoria remained one of the most powerful and admired kingdoms in the realm. Despite its grandeur, darkness lurked within the palace walls, hidden beneath whispers of ambition and deceit. Princess Isabella, the only daughter of King Reginald, was beloved by all who knew her. She possessed a kind heart, a sharp mind, and a deep sense of duty toward her people. Unlike many royals, she often walked among the common folk, listening to their concerns and ensuring their needs were met. Her beauty was rivaled only by her intelligence, making her not just a cherished princess, but also a promising future ruler. However, her life was not without sorrow. Her mother, Queen Eleanor, had passed away when she was young, leaving a void in both her heart and the kingdom. To fill this void, King Reginald had remarried, bringing Lady Morgana into the royal family. At first, Morgana had appeared to be the perfect queen, gracious, elegant, and devoted to her husband. However, behind her soft smiles and gentle words lay a heart consumed by ambition. She had no love for Isabella, seeing her as an obstacle rather than a daughter. Morgana desired complete control over the kingdom, and as long as Isabella remained in favor, her own influence was limited. Though she never outwardly showed hostility, she began planting subtle seeds of doubt, whispering to the king that Isabella was too young and naive to rule. As fate would have it, a neighboring kingdom sent their most esteemed prince to visit Eldoria, Prince Alexander, a renowned warrior and heir to the kingdom of Valmir. Tall, noble, and possessing an air of quiet strength, he arrived in Eldoria to discuss an alliance between their kingdoms. The court buzzed with speculation that a marriage between him and Isabella would solidify their nation's ties. While Isabella found him intriguing, she had little interest in political arrangements. However, Morgana saw an opportunity in the young prince's arrival. Watching from the shadows, Morgana felt a growing sense of unease. If Isabella married Prince Alexander, her power would only increase. Not only would she secure her position as Queen of Eldoria, but she would also gain the support of Valmir. Such an alliance would make her untouchable, leaving Morgana with no way to seize the throne for herself. The thought ignited a dangerous fire within her. She would not allow Isabella to claim what she desired. If Prince Alexander had come to Eldoria, then perhaps it was time to weave a tale so convincing that even he would be unable to see through the lies. And so, as the kingdom celebrated the prince's arrival, Morgana began laying the foundation of her most cunning deception yet. Morgana had always craved power, but as long as Isabella stood in her way, she could never have complete control over the kingdom. She knew that King Reginald, despite her influence, still held his daughter in the highest regard. The people adored Isabella, and with Prince Alexander's arrival, her future as queen seemed inevitable. Morgana could not allow this to happen. If she wanted to rule Eldoria, she had to remove Isabella, not through force, but through carefully spun deception. Her first move was to poison the king's mind against his own daughter. Late at night, as they sat in the royal chambers, Morgana would speak in soft, concerned tones, planting the first seeds of doubt. She expressed worry that Isabella was too naive to rule and too independent to obey her father's wisdom. She hinted that a kingdom ruled by an inexperienced girl could invite chaos. Over time, these whispers became more sinister. She told the king that Isabella had grown distant, that she sought power for herself, and that she might even be conspiring against him. Reginald, who had always trusted Isabella, initially dismissed these concerns, but Morgana was patient. She ensured that each of her lies was backed by subtle, manipulated evidence. A misplaced letter, a suspicious conversation taken out of context, a trusted noble suddenly reluctant to speak in Isabella's defense. Each detail slowly chipped away at the king's certainty. He began to question whether Isabella's kindness was a facade, and whether his beloved daughter had grown ambitious beyond her station. Meanwhile, Morgana ensured that the rumors spread beyond the palace walls. Servants whispered in hushed tones, nobles exchanged wary glances, and soon the idea that Isabella might be plotting something dark took root. The perfect opportunity arose when Prince Alexander unknowingly became entangled in Morgana's scheme. She arranged for him to overhear a conversation between her most loyal informants, carefully orchestrated to sound as if Isabella were plotting treason. They spoke of hidden alliances, of Isabella seeking to overthrow her father and claim the throne for herself. Alexander, who had only begun to understand Isabella, found himself torn. He had admired her kindness and strength, but now doubt clouded his thoughts. Could it be true? Could the woman he was growing fond of truly harbor such ambitions? Though he wanted to dismiss these claims, the whispers followed him wherever he went. Even the king, once firm in his trust, seemed troubled. Morgana watched with satisfaction as suspicion began to take root. Isabella, unaware of the full extent of Morgana's treachery, soon found herself isolated. Her father grew distant, trusted advisors hesitated to speak freely with her, and even Prince Alexander seemed cold and uncertain in her presence. She could feel the shift, the way people looked at her differently, but she did not yet understand why. What had once been her home now felt like a place filled with shadows and unseen enemies. Morgana had played her hand well, and soon Isabella would have nowhere left to turn. Morgana knew that mere whispers and doubts would not be enough to remove Isabella completely. She needed undeniable proof, something so damning that even the king himself would have no choice but to turn against his daughter. With careful precision, she crafted her most dangerous deception yet, a plot that would brand Isabella as a traitor to the kingdom and an enemy to Prince Alexander. The first step in her scheme was the creation of forged letters. Using the handwriting of one of Isabella's former tutors, Morgana had secret documents written, detailing a supposed plan to overthrow King Reginald. These letters made it appear as though Isabella had been plotting with foreign spies, promising them power in exchange for their help in seizing the throne. More importantly, the letters suggested that Isabella sought to betray Prince Alexander, that she was merely using him to strengthen her claim, and, once she had gained control, she would dispose of him as well. To ensure the deception was foolproof, Morgana arranged for one of the letters to be discovered by a trusted royal advisor. She had it placed within Isabella's private study, hidden just well enough that its discovery would appear accidental. The moment the letter was presented to King Reginald and Prince Alexander, Morgana feigned devastation. With carefully practiced sorrow, she expressed her heartbreak over Isabella's supposed betrayal. But the forged letters were not enough. Morgana needed something more, something that would force even the most loyal of Isabella's allies to doubt her. So, she orchestrated a staged attack. Under the cover of night, a group of masked mercenaries, secretly hired by Morgana, launched an assault on the palace guards near Prince Alexander's chambers. Though the attack was quickly subdued, one of the mercenaries was captured and, under duress, revealed that they had been acting under Isabella's orders. The accusation was damning. Prince Alexander, already troubled by the letters, felt his last shred of trust in Isabella crumble. The woman he had begun to admire, the one he had considered aligning his kingdom with, had seemingly plotted his downfall. Fueled by betrayal and anger, he confronted Isabella in the grand hall, in front of the court, demanding an explanation. Isabella, bewildered and heartbroken, denied everything. She pleaded with Alexander to see reason, to question the so-called evidence, to consider who might benefit from framing her. But his heart had already turned against her. The weight of the letters, the staged attack, and the whispers of the court were too much to ignore. With a cold voice, he ordered her imprisonment. Gasps filled the court as guards stepped forward, seizing the princess by the arms. She struggled, her eyes filled with desperation, searching for any sign of mercy in Alexander's gaze. But there was none. As the heavy doors of the dungeon slammed shut behind her, Isabella realized the cruel truth. She had fallen into Morgana's trap. and there was no one left to save her. The cold stone walls of the dungeon pressed in around Isabella as she sat on the damp floor, her wrists bruised from the rough hands of the guards. The flickering torchlight cast eerie shadows, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed through the empty corridors. The weight of betrayal settled heavily on her chest. Just days ago, she had been a princess, beloved by her people, admired by Prince Alexander. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner, condemned by lies she could not fight against. Above her, Morgana stood victorious. With Isabella imprisoned, she had free rein over the kingdom's affairs. She whispered poison into King Reginald's ear, convincing him that his daughter's betrayal had been inevitable. With every passing day, she secured more control, ensuring that those who had once supported Isabella either feared speaking out or had been silenced entirely. She moved through the castle like a queen already seated on her throne, her cruel smile hidden behind a mask of sorrow. Meanwhile, Prince Alexander, though outwardly resolute, found himself troubled. At first, he had been convinced of Isabella's treachery. The letters, the attack, everything had pointed to her guilt. But something gnawed at him, a whisper of doubt that refused to fade. He remembered the way she had looked at him when she pleaded for him to believe her. He had seen desperation, but not deception. He had expected rage, but found only heartbreak. The certainty that had burned so fiercely in him before now flickered like a dying candle. Late one night, as Alexander sat alone in his chambers, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. A servant entered hesitantly, glancing over his shoulder before pulling a crumpled piece of parchment from his pocket. "Your Highness," the servant whispered, "I found this hidden in the Queen's study. You must read it." Alexander unfolded the parchment, his eyes scanning the hastily scribbled words. His breath caught in his throat. The letter revealed the truth. Morgana's forged documents, the mercenaries she had hired, the way she had planted false evidence against Isabella. It was all part of an elaborate plot to eliminate the princess and seize power for herself. His heart pounded as the realization struck him like a blade to the chest. He had been deceived. He had condemned an innocent woman, the woman who had trusted him, who had done nothing but show kindness. Guilt weighed down on him, thick and suffocating. He had made a grave mistake, and if he did not act quickly, it would cost Isabella everything. Rising from his seat, determination burning in his eyes, Alexander knew what he had to do. He would not let Morgana's lies go unpunished. He would right the wrong he had done. But first, he had to save Isabella before it was too late. Prince Alexander wasted no time. The moment he uncovered the truth, he knew he had to act before Morgana tightened her grip on the kingdom. He had betrayed Isabella once by believing the lies. He would not fail her again. But breaking her out of the dungeon would not be easy. Morgana had ensured that only her most loyal guards stood watch over Isabella's cell, knowing that the princess still had allies who might attempt to free her. Alexander spent the next day gathering supplies and formulating a plan. He could not openly defy Morgana without proof, so he had to act in secrecy. Disguising himself in a hooded cloak, he made his way to the lower levels of the castle under the cover of night. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and burning torches as he slipped past patrols, his heart pounding with each careful step. Reaching the dungeon, he found 2 guards stationed outside Isabella's cell. He could not risk raising the alarm, so he had to act swiftly. With precise movements, he knocked one unconscious and subdued the other before retrieving the keys from their belts. Taking a steadying breath, he unlocked the heavy iron door and stepped inside. Isabella sat in the corner, her eyes dull and weary. At the sound of the door creaking open, she looked up, and for a moment, disbelief flickered across her face. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "No time to explain," he said urgently, pulling her to her feet. "We need to get out of here." Though weak from days in captivity, Isabella forced herself to move. They slipped through the corridors, keeping to the shadows, but just as they reached the outer courtyard, an alarm rang through the castle. "They've discovered us," Alexander muttered, gripping Isabella's hand. Guards rushed toward them, but Alexander fought fiercely, cutting down those who tried to block their escape. Isabella, though unarmed, moved with agility, dodging blows and using the environment to evade capture. They pushed forward, but just as they reached the castle gates, a furious voice echoed through the night. "Find them! I want them alive!" Morgana's wrathful command sent a wave of fresh soldiers after them. Desperate, Alexander and Isabella sprinted into the dense forest bordering the kingdom. The trees provided cover, but their pursuers were relentless. Just when it seemed they might be cornered, a figure stepped from the shadows. A grizzled old knight, battle-worn but standing tall. "Come with me," he said in a hushed voice. "I swore to protect the true heir of Eldoria." With no other choice, Alexander and Isabella followed him into the darkness, unaware that their journey was only beginning. The night air was thick with tension as Alexander and Isabella followed the old knight through the dense forest. Each step they took felt heavier than the last, knowing that Morgana's soldiers were not far behind. Their newfound ally, Sir Aldric, was once a revered warrior of Eldoria, a man who had served King Reginald faithfully before Morgana manipulated the court and forced his retirement. Now he had returned to fulfill an oath he had made long ago to protect the rightful heir of Eldoria. In a hidden shelter deep within the forest, they planned their next move. If they wanted to reclaim the kingdom, they needed proof, irrefutable evidence of Morgana's deception. Sir Aldric revealed that he had secretly gathered records of Morgana's dealings over the years, letters exchanged with mercenaries, and testimonies from castle servants who had witnessed her sinister plans unfold. With this information, they had the power to expose her, but the challenge remained: how to present it to King Reginald before Morgana could silence them forever. Just as they finalized their strategy, the distant sound of galloping hooves shattered the night's silence. Morgana's soldiers had found their trail. They barely had time to react before arrows flew past them, striking the trees with deadly precision. Sir Aldric led them through a secret path, using his knowledge of the land to evade capture. For hours they ran, pushing through exhaustion and fear, until finally the castle gates loomed in the distance. They had no choice but to make their stand. If they hesitated, Morgana would ensure they never had another chance. Steeling themselves, they rode toward the palace, storming through the gates before the guards could stop them. Gasps filled the royal hall as Alexander, Isabella, and Sir Aldric burst into the throne room, their clothes torn and their faces marked by the night's ordeal. King Reginald rose in shock. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice laced with confusion and anger. Alexander stepped forward, holding up the documents. "The truth, Your Majesty. Morgana has deceived us all." The room fell into silence as he presented the evidence: letters forged in Isabella's name, records of Morgana's secret meetings with mercenaries, and statements from palace servants who had been coerced into silence. One by one, trusted knights stepped forward, revealing what they had seen but had been too afraid to speak of before. The weight of their words crushed the web of lies Morgana had spun. Morgana's face paled as the court murmured, realization dawning upon them. "Lies! All lies!" she shrieked, but her voice wavered with panic. King Reginald turned to Isabella, guilt flashing in his eyes. He had doubted his own daughter, allowed himself to be blinded by Morgana's manipulations. Regret washed over him as he saw the truth at last. He clenched his fists, his voice heavy with sorrow and anger. "Guards, seize her." Morgana had ruled through deception for too long, but now her reign of lies had come to an end. The throne room erupted into chaos. Morgana's mask of deceit had shattered, but she would not fall without a fight. Her eyes, once filled with cunning calculation, now burned with pure rage. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You are all fools!" Before the guards could seize her, Morgana raised her hands, whispering incantations in an ancient tongue. Dark energy crackled in the air, the torches flickering wildly as an unnatural wind surged through the hall. Gasps and screams filled the room as shadows twisted and writhed around her, taking shape into monstrous forms. King Reginald stepped back, his face pale. "She's using forbidden magic." With a deafening roar, Morgana unleashed her fury. The shadowy creatures lunged at the knights, forcing them into battle. Alexander drew his sword, his grip steady despite the overwhelming darkness. Isabella, too, stood her ground, grabbing a fallen soldier's blade. She had spent her life learning diplomacy, but now she would fight for her kingdom with her own hands. The battle was fierce. Morgana wielded her magic ruthlessly, sending waves of dark power against her enemies. The loyal knights fought valiantly, cutting through the creatures, but each time one fell, another took its place. Alexander and Isabella moved together, their strikes precise and unyielding. Then, Morgana turned her wrath upon Isabella. "You should have died in that dungeon," she sneered, hurling a bolt of dark energy toward her. But Isabella did not falter. Instead, she lifted her sword, deflecting the attack with a burst of sheer will. The power rebounded, striking Morgana instead. She staggered, her magic faltering for the first time. Alexander seized the opportunity. With a final charge, he struck at Morgana, his blade cutting through the darkness that surrounded her. She shrieked as the magic she had wielded for so long turned against her, consuming her in its grasp. The shadowy forms around the room dissolved, and the air grew still. Morgana fell to her knees, her strength depleted. The guards rushed forward, shackling her in enchanted chains that nullified her powers. Her once commanding presence was now reduced to a pitiful, trembling figure. King Reginald stepped forward, his expression grim. "You have betrayed this kingdom for the last time, Morgana," he declared. "For your crimes, you are banished from Eldoria. You will never set foot in this land again." As the guards dragged Morgana away, her screams of fury echoed through the halls, but they no longer held power over anyone. With the kingdom finally free from her grasp, Isabella stood before the court, her head held high. The people who had doubted her now bowed in respect, murmuring her name with reverence. She had endured suffering, betrayal, and despair, but she had risen above it all. Justice had been served, and Isabella had reclaimed her rightful place, not just as a princess, but as a true leader of Eldoria. The dawn after Morgana's downfall brought a sense of renewal to Eldoria. The dark presence that had loomed over the kingdom for so long had finally lifted, but the wounds she had inflicted remained. Trust had been shattered, and fear had taken root in the hearts of the people. Isabella knew that healing would take time, but she was determined to restore what had been lost. She walked through the streets, speaking with the people, reassuring them that justice had been served. The knights who had once hesitated to defend her now swore their loyalty. The servants who had been too afraid to speak against Morgana came forward with their gratitude. Slowly, the whispers of doubt were replaced with voices of hope. Alexander stood by her side through it all, helping to rebuild what Morgana had tried to destroy. Though he had once been blinded by lies, he was now unwavering in his support for Isabella. He worked tirelessly to undo the damage, meeting with noble families who had turned against the princess, ensuring they understood the truth. His presence alone reassured the people. If the prince himself had once been deceived, but now stood firmly beside Isabella, then surely she was worthy of their trust. In the royal court, King Reginald struggled with the weight of his mistakes. He had allowed Morgana's whispers to cloud his judgment, turning against his own daughter when she needed him most. Now, as he looked upon Isabella, standing tall despite all she had endured, his heart ached with regret. Summoning her to the throne room, he took a deep breath before speaking. "Isabella, my daughter, I have wronged you in the worst way." His voice wavered, uncharacteristically soft. "I let my fears and Morgana's lies blind me. I failed you when I should have protected you." Isabella, though still hurt by his betrayal, saw the sincerity in his eyes. He had been deceived, just as Alexander had been. Though the pain could not be undone, she knew that forgiveness was the only path forward. "Father," she said gently, "what matters now is that the truth has been revealed, and Eldoria can heal." Tears glistened in the king's eyes as he embraced his daughter, a moment of long overdue reconciliation. As the days passed, the kingdom celebrated its rebirth. Festivals filled the streets, laughter returned to the palace, and hope flourished once more. It was during one such celebration that Alexander took Isabella aside, leading her to the palace gardens beneath the glow of lanterns. "I once doubted you," he admitted, taking her hands in his, "and I will never forgive myself for that. But I have seen your strength, your kindness, and your courage. I stand before you not just as a prince, but as a man who admires and loves you." Isabella's breath caught as he knelt before her. "Will you be my queen?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. A smile broke across her face as she whispered, "Yes." The kingdom cheered as their future rulers sealed their promise with a kiss, marking the beginning of a new era for Eldoria, one of love, trust, and unshakable unity. The day of the royal wedding dawned with golden sunlight streaming over Eldoria, as if the heavens themselves rejoiced in the union of Isabella and Alexander. The castle, once shrouded in the shadows of betrayal, now stood adorned with banners of gold and silver, symbolizing the unity of two kingdoms. Flowers cascaded down the grand staircase, their fragrance mingling with the laughter and music that filled the air. Dignitaries and nobles from neighboring lands arrived to witness the momentous occasion. The people of Eldoria, who had once doubted their princess, now gathered in the streets, their voices lifted in joyful celebration. Isabella, once a prisoner in her own home, now stood at the heart of it all, not as a victim, but as a queen-to-be. As she walked down the aisle, dressed in a gown woven with threads of silver and sapphire, her eyes met Alexander's. There was no doubt, no hesitation, only love, trust, and the promise of a future built on truth. Alexander, standing at the altar, could hardly believe that he had almost lost her. He had once been blinded by deception, but Isabella's unwavering spirit had shown him the strength of truth. When they spoke their vows, they were not just promises of love, but of loyalty and partnership. "I will never doubt you again," Alexander whispered as he placed the ring upon her finger. "And I will always stand by your side," Isabella replied, sealing their bond with a kiss as the kingdom erupted in cheers. The celebrations lasted for days, with feasts, music, and dancing that stretched into the nights. The people rejoiced not only in the marriage, but in the return of justice and peace. Tales of Morgana's downfall spread across the land, serving as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and blind trust. The kingdom had learned a lesson it would never forget. In the months that followed, Isabella and Alexander ruled together with wisdom and compassion. Their love became the heart of Eldoria's strength, a beacon of hope for generations to come. Songs were written of the princess who overcame deception and the prince who learned to see the truth. One evening, as they stood upon the castle balcony, watching the lanterns drift into the night sky, Isabella turned to Alexander. "We've come so far," she said softly. He nodded, his hand entwining with hers, "because truth will always shine, no matter how dark the lies." And with that, their story became legend, a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption that would be told for centuries, reminding all who heard it that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of truth would always find its way through. Years passed, and the tale of Princess Isabella's trials and triumphs became woven into the very fabric of Eldoria's history. The kingdom, once plagued by deception and betrayal, now flourished under the rule of its just and beloved leaders. King Alexander and Queen Isabella governed with wisdom, ensuring that no shadow of deceit would ever again take root within the palace walls. As for Morgana, she was stripped of her titles and exiled to the farthest reaches of the land, where her influence could never touch Eldoria again. Some whispered that she wandered the desolate mountains, her once formidable power reduced to nothing but bitter regrets. Others claimed she sought out dark forces once more, vowing revenge in hushed curses. But in the end, it mattered little. Morgana was gone, her name a cautionary tale rather than a threat. With peace restored, Eldoria blossomed. Trade with neighboring kingdoms flourished, and the people thrived under the rule of a queen who had once been unjustly cast aside. No longer just a royal figure, Isabella had become a symbol of resilience and truth, inspiring generations to stand firm against deception and injustice. In the royal archives, scribes recorded the story of the princess who had been betrayed, the prince who had been blinded by lies, and the stepmother whose greed had led to her downfall. Parents told their children of the dangers of blind trust and unchecked ambition, ensuring that Morgana's mistakes would never be repeated. Yet, beyond the politics and history, Isabella and Alexander's love remained at the heart of the kingdom's newfound strength. Their bond, forged in hardship and tested by betrayal, stood as proof that love built on truth could overcome even the darkest of lies. On quiet nights, as the stars glittered above the castle, Isabella would walk the gardens, listening to the laughter of their children playing among the flowers. Alexander would join her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and they would share a knowing smile. Their journey had been filled with pain, but it had led them here, to a life of love, trust, and unwavering unity. One evening, as an old storyteller finished recounting their tale to an eager crowd of children in the village square, he ended with the words that had echoed through time. Deception may weave a cage of darkness, but truth will always be the key that sets us free. And so, the legend of Isabella and Alexander lived on, a tale remembered not just for its battles and betrayals, but for the enduring power of truth, love, and justice.